What's up, everybody? Welcome to History Things with Pat. Doing something a little different for you tonight. Hanging out with my co-host, Matt Borders from the History Things podcast. And we're actually here to talk about something pretty special. I'm just going to reach for it real fast. My co-host on the show is now a two-time published author. Ladies and gentlemen, Faces of Union Soldiers at Antietam paved the way for Faces of Union Soldiers at Harpers, Ferry, and South Mountain. I got that in the right order, right?
South Mountain
or Harpers Ferry. God, I'm so bad at this. So, Faces of Union Soldiers at Antietam, obviously a big hit.
It was.
Before we get into the new book, just kind of talk about since we sat down, the book was published. We've had a little bit more than a year, 2 years kind of coming up on. How many years has actually that book been out? 2 years now?
It'll be 2 years on July.
Awesome. So 2 years since you first got published. How Faces of Union Soldiers at Antietam go?
It has sold almost its entire first run.
Wow.
Yep.
Dude, awesome. I bought all the books.
They did about 1,000 books on the first run to basically see how we were going to do, and it's sold almost all.
Dude, congrats. Well, obviously they loved it enough to have you and Joe back.
Right.
Obviously your co-author, Joe Stahl,
Yep.
The guy that helped you create all this magic here. So the first book followed a series of soldiers through the various phases of the battlefield. You got into the battle itself in the context of kind of where these guys were. You got into some of the things you would see in these photographs of these guys, the uniforms, things like
Correct.
that. We're going into the second book with the very similar structures. Can you talk about just sort of how you and Joe decided to kind of take the one book and turn it into what's going to be a series at this point?
It is. The Faces of series, as we've kind of been calling it. But yes, this book does follow the other battles, the preliminary battles of the Maryland campaign, where we started it off with the big show of Antietam. Faces of Union Soldiers at South Mountain and Harpers Ferry takes those fights that are leading up to America's bloodiest day. And where we took the Antietam battlefield and broke it down into its various sections, if you will, for the first book, what we've done for Faces of Union Soldiers at South Mountain and Harpers Ferry is we have taken the 4, not 3, 4 gaps of South Mountain and Harpers Ferry. And so it is a 5-chapter book. We have 30 soldiers we're covering, with 6 of those soldiers at each of the gaps, and of course Harpers Ferry itself.
Are some of the guys in the second book guys that were featured in the first book that might have just also participated, or are we getting a whole new group of guys this time?
You're getting some of the same units, but different guys.
So this is
not doubling up on the historical characters.
So this is unique because you're doing this entirely from CDVs that exist out in Joe's private collection and the one that you're building for yourself as
Correct.
well. So you're giving us a whole new crop of guys from these really rare and hard to find kind of photographs. So first of all, that's awesome. Joe's collection must be freaking huge.
It is.
But also, like, how did Joe know already which guys he wanted to do when you were writing the first book for this? Or did you guys have to sit down and kind of just like, this guy was here and like kind of just go through these? I'm imagining Joe's collection's probably a couple hundred of these.
It is. Joe has an extensive collection of CDVs or Carte Vistas, the paper and mass-produced pictures of the era. What we did with the first book, very similar with what we did with the second, is first off determined if the guys were there, and then those who we knew who were actually there, we could verify them with their records. We would then go and find out, okay, what part of the field are they at, or which gaps are they at? Then we would gather them together. And then, of course, the fun part was once we had enough guys at each gap or Harpers Ferry, it was going through and really determining what is going to be the pictures that are most interesting to the readers.
Yeah, the ones that you want to look at.
Right. We do have, I think we've got a great crop of images in this most recent book. We had a good run in the first book, but we've got a really good run in the second one. Less of the just bust shots or head shots, and we've really been able to get a lot more of at least half to almost
like full uniform kind of shots. That's
full
awesome.
Stand-in images, things of that nature.
That's got to be cool for you because I know you do love looking at the material culture of the war, so the uniforms and the things like that. So fuller pictures is probably a lot more for you to digest as a historian.
Oh, it is, and I mean it makes for more writing, and so we've got some really good narratives that have been developed for these guys, their unit history, obviously, and then a whole sweep on the individual, and then what you're getting from the image itself.
So was the writing process for the second book similar? Like, you were writing narratives that if you put these all in one book together, they would all kind of flow in terms of writing styles and things like that? Or did you guys change how you wanted to write with kind of like the lessons learned from the first experience?
What I'm most proud of for this book, because it was a learning experience from the first book to the second, is we've been able to increase the amount of genealogical information that we've got for each of the gentlemen in this book, but also we were able to find for almost every single one of these soldiers where they were buried.
Wow.
And we've got that information included in the chapters.
That's very neat. So I actually want to side pivot for a second, because you've said two things in this interview so far that I think are important to highlight. First, 4 gaps.
Yes.
Traditionally, the South Mountain narrative revolves around Fox's, Turner, and I'm blanking hardcore in the moment. What? Crampton's Gap. God, I'm done. What's the 4th gap?
The 4th gap is lesser known for sure, and it is actually north of Turner's Gap. It is the Frosttown Plateau, or known as in some books as Frosttown Gap.
Okay, cool. So what kind of happens at the Frosttown Gap? Just what's the reason that you think we kind of forget about what happens here?
I don't think it's necessarily that we forget about it. I think it's the ease of access that's made it difficult. The Maryland State Parks has done a good job trying to interpret the Turner's, Fox's, and Crampton's Gap. They actually have park sites at Turner's and Crampton's, and then some monumentation and interpretive signage at Fox's Gap. But north of Turner's Gap, of course, is Frosttown, and that's almost entirely private land.
Okay.
And we get into that in the book a little bit, how you will not be able to necessarily engage with the landscape as much as with the other gaps. However, for our Pennsylvania fans out there, this is where the Pennsylvania Reserves fight.
Ooh. The other thing you said, which I kind of chuckled, because I committed the sin, as we've been discussing it over the last few months, but I described the battle in phases. And I know that we're kind of the Battle of Antietam in phases. And I know that a lot of more modern interpretation is moving away from the phases and moving more into the sections, because there's simultaneous action and fighting happening all along all 3 of the places that you think of as separate, isolated morning, midday, or morning, afternoon, and like late, I guess, phases, kind of the battle. Really, when you talk about it, it needs to be talked about in sections, because these things are happening kind of concurrent to each other. So I liked when you said that. I was like, you're right. We've talked about that a lot this year. So,
well, and that was one of the challenges for the second book as well, honestly, because you have 3 to 4 gaps, depending on the time of day, that are engaged at the same time. And then, of course, the ongoing engagement at Harpers Ferry, which it runs for 3 days.
Which of the 2 of the preliminary 2 Antietam engagements was the more difficult, and which was the more fun to write about? Or maybe they were the same?
That's actually a really good question. The Battle of, as opposed to Siege, Battle of Harpers Ferry was very interesting to write about, because we had some very good help with that. One of our colleagues that helped review that chapter was actually Dennis Fry, the former historian
Name drop
of Harpers Ferry. And Dennis is a friend and colleague of both Joe and mine through the Antietam Guides. And so he was able to take a look at that with us and also provide us with some good insights in regards to how we should be looking at the battle. He was very specific that it's a battle, not a siege. An interesting idea, an interesting discussion for sure. But getting into some of these lesser known units, these units that we don't hear very much about. They're involved with the siege of Harpers Ferry, and then everybody gets sent out to Camp Douglas in Chicago. So digging into some of these more obscure regiments was really interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, Harper's Ferry is one of my more favorite stories of the American Civil War, and I'd be interested to hear the battle versus siege kind of conversation, because I like siege. I mean, to me, it feels more, and it's not like a major siege, but it kind of has all the ingredients of the soup.
And I would agree, and we actually wrote it as siege initially, and Dennis was pretty quick to point out that really the interpretation should be battle.
All right,
it was an interesting discussion for sure.
Dennis certainly knows what he's talking about. So
Most definitely.
it'd be worth to listen to see what he says. And obviously, like, what the hell do I know? But that's awesome. So with the second book coming out, let's get right into that. When is it dropping, Matt? When can people buy Faces of Union Soldiers at South Mountain and Harpers Ferry?
What's today's date, Pat?
Today is April 16th. You don't put me on the spot like that. It's Friday.
It's dropping Monday, the
Ooh,
19th.
Monday, April 19th. All right. So most major book publications, right?
Correct.
Places like Amazon, things like that. You can buy it at Barnes & Nobles, things like that, right?
Should be available on the 19th at all of our booksellers. And now, unfortunately, our friends at both the Antietam Museum Shop and Harpers Ferry, they're a bit of a smaller scale, and they may not have them right on the 19th. I know Antietam wants to get it in, but probably won't have it on Monday. Harpers Ferry, we're definitely looking to get it in there. They are run by a different organization, so they may have it in.
And what did we learn last summer when we went looking for your book in person? If you are local to our area, you're going to find Matt's book in the local history section. You're not going to go to the main history and the main Civil War section and find this, because if you exist in the state of Maryland, they're going to throw you in the local section. So make sure you know that, and go into Barnes & Noble if you want to buy it physically in person, and you go pick it up in the local section. Matt, I'm going to wrap it up here real quick. Just want to say a couple quick thank yous to you. Thanks for coming on History Things with Pat just to talk about your second book. I'm super proud of you, dude. I'm humbled and proud to be your friend and be your partner and co-host at the History Things podcast every day. So I'm super jacked for this. I hope that you take off like a freaking rocket. This guy's the best park ranger I've ever met in my life. So I hope you guys get out there and see him at Monocacy this summer when things open up a little more and you can, hear some of his interpretations, and absolutely buy his books and read them. They are amazing. Joe is a fantastic writer. Matt is a fantastic writer. These guys bring you stories that are awesome, and look forward to a couple things coming up in the future. After the first time we did this interview, we did a cutting room floor episode about Captain Tracy Cheever.
One of your favorites.
He became mine. I never knew about this guy, and I love telling a story. But obviously, when you get down to the Rohrbach Bridge or the Burnside Bridge at Antietam National Battlefield, we hear a lot about the dual 51st.
Right. We
don't really hear a lot about the 35th Massachusetts
and 3rd Regiment over the bridge.
Yeah, and these guys come over, and they're actually involved in a lot more of the press on towards what's known as the final attack or the final engagement. And this captain has quite a crappy day after they get across the bridge, but his story was wild, and it wasn't wild enough to make it into the book. Buy this guy's book, because the stuff that's in the book is crazier. Captain Tracy Cheever got hit by a flying fence rail that was likely blasted by artillery, and he lived, and he became a politician later, right? Doesn't he serve as like a senator or a congressman or something?
Yeah.
Very cool. So there's lots of information in these books. So proud of you. Really excited to see what this brings for you next. Obviously, this is going to be a series, so who knows? You guys are. Wait, we can't release it yet. I know. Wait,
we've got number 3. We're already working on.
All right, but there's more to come on that. And then we're doing a field video. And obviously, Matt and I together really thank you all for tuning into the History Things podcast. So if you're following along here at History Things with Pat and you're wondering, when I go dark sometimes where I'm at, go over to the History Things podcast. Matt and I are over there telling really good stories. And we really appreciate you guys giving us a follow. You can find us on most major podcast apps, Spotify, Apple podcasts, and all that stuff. Leave us reviews, give us 5-star ratings if you like what we're doing and things like that. Cool. And absolutely buy his book and give it a positive rating on Amazon, guys. I don't know what else to say. Matt, it's a pleasure working with you. Thanks for coming on History Things with Pat, and I wish you mad success in the future, dude.
Appreciate it, buddy.
See you, bud.